The town of Brookfield was quiet most days, a place where people nodded to one another on the street but rarely stopped to talk. Life moved at a steady pace, everyone busy with their own struggles and routines. In the middle of this ordinary town lived Ken Steele, a man who, at first glance, seemed just as ordinary as anyone else. He worked at the local hardware store, kept his small house tidy, and walked to work every day with the same gentle smile on his face. People knew him by sight, but few knew much about him. Ken was the kind of man who blended into the background, never demanding attention. Yet, behind that quiet presence, there was a heart that held an extraordinary gift, the ability to see when others were hurting, and the courage to respond with kindness. One particularly harsh winter tested the spirit of the town. The snow fell endlessly, roads turned icy, and the cold seemed to seep into people's bones. It was on one of those nights, when the streetlights glowed faintly through the swirling snow, that Ken was walking home from the store, his breath rising in white clouds. He noticed an elderly man sitting on a park bench near the frozen fountain. The man's shoulders trembled under a threadbare coat, his thin hands exposed and red from the bitter wind. Most passers-by had hurried on, burying their faces into scarves, too distracted by their own discomfort to notice. But Ken stopped. He stood there for a moment, watching, debating. He was tired, and the warmth of his home wasn't far away. Yet something in the old man's eyes, a mixture of weariness and quiet desperation, made Ken step forward. He walked up and said softly, "Sir, it's too cold to sit out here. Are you all right?" The old man looked up, startled, his eyes watery and bloodshot. "I'll be fine," he muttered, though the violent shiver running through his body told another story. Ken didn't argue. Instead, he slipped off his own heavy jacket and placed it over the man's shoulders. "Here. This will help." The man resisted at first, shaking his head. "You'll freeze without it." Ken smiled gently. "I'll be okay. I'm almost home. You need it more than I do." For a moment the old man's lips trembled, as though words wouldn't come. Finally, he whispered, "Thank you. I can't remember the last time someone stopped to see me." Ken sat beside him for a few minutes, ignoring the cold that bit at his arms. They talked quietly, and Ken learned the man's name was Walter. He had once been a carpenter, but age and illness had stripped away his work, his savings, and eventually his home. Now he drifted from place to place, invisible to most. Ken listened without judgment, offering no grand solutions, just the simple gift of being present. Before leaving, Ken handed Walter a small card with the address of the shelter across town. "They'll give you a warm bed tonight," he said. "Tell them Ken sent you." That single night's encounter might have been forgotten if not for what followed. Walter did go to the shelter, and for the first time in weeks, he slept in warmth. He told the staff about the stranger who had given him his jacket, who had listened without turning away. The story spread among the volunteers, and slowly, word trickled through the town about Ken Steele's quiet act of compassion. But Ken never told anyone himself. To him, it wasn't extraordinary. It was simply what a person should do. Still, the story didn't end there. Over the following weeks, Ken began to notice things he hadn't before. A single mother at the grocery store counting coins with worry etched on her face. A teenager sitting alone outside the diner, pretending not to be hungry. An elderly woman struggling with bags too heavy for her frail arms. Each time, Ken stepped in. Sometimes it was small, paying for a bag of groceries, sharing a meal, carrying the bags home. Other times it meant taking the time to sit, talk, and listen. His kindness created ripples. The teenager he bought dinner for, named Jason, later told his friends how a stranger had treated him with respect when he felt invisible. The single mother, Rachel, found herself crying not from despair but from relief when someone saw her struggle and quietly covered the bill at the store. The elderly woman told her neighbors how a man she barely knew walked her all the way home just to make sure she didn't slip on the ice. People began to notice a change in Brookfield. Inspired by Ken's quiet example, others started to act differently too. The grocer began setting aside day-old bread to give to families in need. Neighbors checked in on one another during the coldest nights. Strangers offered rides when cars got stuck in the snow. It was as if Ken had sparked a flame that everyone had been carrying deep inside, waiting for someone to light it. Ken never sought recognition, and in truth, he sometimes felt embarrassed when people mentioned what he'd done. "I just did what anyone would do," he would say with a shrug. But not everyone would. That was the difference. Months passed, the snow melted, and spring returned. Flowers bloomed, and with them came a new energy in the town. Walter, the old man from the bench, had begun working part-time at the shelter, using his carpentry skills to make repairs. He had regained dignity, not just because of the shelter, but because someone had reminded him he still mattered. He often told others, "It started with one jacket, but really, it was the kindness behind it that saved me." Ken, hearing this one evening when he stopped by the shelter to drop off supplies, simply smiled. He never asked for thanks. What mattered to him was knowing that Walter had found his footing again. The remarkable thing about Ken Steele was not that he performed one grand heroic act. It was that his life became a chain of small, consistent moments of kindness, strung together to form something larger than he ever intended. He believed that kindness didn't need to be dramatic to be powerful. It could be as simple as a smile, a conversation, or the willingness to notice when someone was struggling. One summer afternoon, Ken was walking through the town square when a boy ran up to him. It was Jason, the teenager he had once bought dinner for. Now taller, with brighter eyes, Jason said, "Mr. Steele, I got into college. I just wanted to tell you, that night you sat with me, I was at my lowest. I thought nobody cared. But you did. And it changed everything." Ken felt his throat tighten. He placed a hand on Jason's shoulder and said softly, "You did the hard work. I just reminded you you're not alone." And that was the truth of Ken's kindness. He didn't try to fix people's lives for them. He reminded them they weren't invisible, that they were worth caring about. And that reminder gave them the strength to carry forward, to believe in themselves again. As years went by, Ken's presence became something like the heartbeat of Brookfield. People might not have known all the details of his life, but they knew his spirit. They knew that if Ken Steele walked by, he would notice them. And being noticed, being truly seen, was a gift more precious than gold. One autumn evening, a group of townspeople gathered in the square for a community event. Lanterns glowed, children laughed, music played softly. It was a celebration of the town itself, of how they had come together through seasons both harsh and gentle. The mayor stood on the small stage and spoke about unity, about resilience, about compassion. And then he said something that made Ken shift uncomfortably in the crowd. "There is one person here whose quiet kindness has inspired us all. He never asked for recognition, but without him, we would not be the community we are today. Ken Steele, would you please come forward?" The crowd erupted in applause, voices calling his name. Ken hesitated, almost retreating, but the people around him urged him forward. Reluctantly, he climbed the steps, his cheeks flushed. "I didn't do anything special," he said into the microphone, his voice steady but humble. "I just did what we're all capable of. Kindness isn't mine alone. It belongs to everyone here. You don't need money, or power, or anything grand to show kindness. You just need to notice someone and care enough to act. That's it." The square was silent for a moment, and then the applause rose again, louder, deeper, not just for Ken, but for what he had reminded them of, the simple, profound truth that kindness, even in its smallest forms, could change lives. As the lanterns floated into the night sky, Ken stepped down from the stage. He didn't see himself as a hero. He was just Ken Steele, a man who chose, time and again, to answer the quiet call of humanity. But for the people of Brookfield, he was something more, a living proof that one person's kindness could ripple outward until it became the story of an entire town. And so the tale of Ken Steele lived on, not in books or newspapers, but in the way people treated one another. In the groceries paid for, the doors held open, the strangers acknowledged with a smile. His name became less important than the lesson he embodied, that true kindness doesn't need recognition, it simply needs to be lived.